Welcome to Theories of the Third Kind. My name is Aaron. The other host joining me today is Danielson.
Hello.
Now, before we start today's episode, we have a couple of announcements to make.
If you would like to support the show, you could do so by joining our premium subscription service, Supercast. For just $6.66 a month, you can enjoy weekly premium audio episodes that are all ad-free and have access to our entire back catalog of over 270 plus episodes that are also ad-free.
Or if you want to be a big baller and see our faces one extra time each week, other than our free YouTube episode, then you can sign up to our premium video service for $9.99. And you can do that by going to theoriesofthethirdkind.com. Right there in the middle, there's going to be a button that says Supercast. You can click on that. It'll take you over there, and it's super easy to sign up.
Now, we know things are tough out there right now, so if you can't afford a premium membership but you still want to help us out, you could do so by leaving us a rent review on iTunes or Spotify.
That helps us out a lot.
However, don't feel pressured to do so. If you don't want to, then that's fine. We just want you guys, girls, aliens, reptilians, Bigfoot, Sasquatches, chupacabras, ghosts, Illuminati members, underground lizard people, whoever or whatever you are, to enjoy the show. Also, remember, this episode is entirely human-made. No AI were used or harmed in the process, other than for the base graphic template.
That is correct. Also, if you want to, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. That will help us out quite a bit since we're trying to build that base up. But we earn no money on YouTube because they won't let us.
Also, follow us on TikTok.
Yeah, follow us on TikTok as well. We don't earn any money over there either.
No, we just want followers.
Yeah. Spreading the truth. Speaking of spreading the truth, I know October 13th is coming up, which is, of course, Columbus Day. And I know that a growing number of states in the U.S. have begun to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day, which I personally support. However, since there are a lot of schools and people who don't know the true story behind Christopher Columbus, I figured that today would be the perfect day to do an episode about him and all the shit he has done. So to start this episode off, I want you to picture this. A man in chains shipped back across the Atlantic Ocean, once held as a hero, now accused of tyranny, brutality, and betrayal. This man is Christopher Columbus. And today, we're diving into his life, voyages, his downfall, and the weird, unsettling truths behind this individual. So, Dan, can you start it off for us?
Of course. So it all began around the year 1451. A kid named Christopher Columbus was born in the Republic of Genoa, which, by the way, the Republic of Genoa is a port city in what's now northwest Italy.
And we have a photograph of that, and we'll post it up right here.
There's that shitty boot right there.
Yeah, Italy. And there's Genoa right there in the upper left. And all of the graphics and photos that we referenced today will be also on our website, theoriesofthethirdkind.com, or you can just go to our YouTube channel and watch this episode there and see all the photographs right there and our faces. All right. So Christopher wasn't born into some fancy family or anything. His dad wove cloth for a living and sold cheese on the side. And his mom was a stay-at-home mom and pretty much looked after their 5 kids.
So needless to say, Christopher's childhood wasn't a glamorous one at all. He hated working with wool, but he loved hanging out by the docks, staring at the ships and listening to all the stories about the adventures at sea.
Now, by the time he was a teenager, Christopher was able to get himself a job as a deckhand on a merchant ship. During this time, he would learn how to handle sails, steer the boat, and read the stars.
Shortly after that, Columbus began running routes around the Mediterranean, and before long, he was traveling as far as England and even Iceland. This gave him real-world skills in navigation and map-making.
But here's the thing, the sea isn't exactly a gentle teacher. In his mid-20s, Columbus would find that out the hard way, thanks to a rough experience off the coast of Portugal. And it would be this moment that would change the course of his life.
All right, so it's around August of 1476, it's nighttime, and just off the coast of Portugal is a large merchant ship. Now, standing on the deck of this large ship is Christopher Columbus, who is in his mid-20s.
Now, Columbus is feeling pretty good about himself. He's living his dream, sailing the seas on a merchant ship that's hauling around valuable cargo. But his dream quickly turns into a nightmare.
Out of the darkness, in the distance, sails appear. Not friendly ones. French privateers. basically pirates with paperwork.
Suddenly, the night explodes. The ship in the distance fires its cannon at Columbus's ship and hits it. Splintering wood starts flying everywhere, and the sailors on the merchant ship begin screaming.
So things start to go downhill fast for Columbus. His vessel catches fire, breaks apart, and he jumps into the freezing Atlantic water to escape. For miles, Columbus clings to a chunk of wreckage, kicking through the black water, every stroke a fight against exhaustion.
Finally, somehow, he drags himself onto the Portuguese shore. That wreck didn't just spare his life, it sent him on a new path. Columbus limped his way into Lisbon, where his younger brother, Bartholomew, pretty much a map maker, gave him shelter and set the stage for everything that came next.
All right, so now we're in Lisbon in the late 1470s. Back then, the city was basically exploration headquarters. If you wanted to sail somewhere no one had ever been, or, fall off the edge of the world, Lisbon was a place to hang out.
Of course, Columbus soaked all of this up. He dove into math, astronomy, map making, and navigation, trying to crack the secrets of the ocean.
Also, around this time, Christopher Columbus marries a Portuguese noblewoman named Filipa. Now, marrying Filipa came with perks. Columbus was granted access to her family's treasure trove of sea charts and a network of people who actually knew things about ships and trade winds.
By the early 1480s, Columbus wasn't just some wool weaver's kid who liked boats. He had a plan, a huge, wild idea that most people thought was absolutely nuts. But he was ready to prove everyone wrong.
Now, Columbus was dead set on sailing across an ocean that no one had mapped before. And to understand the reason why, we need to go to Aaron and Dan's history class.
So, everyone gather around, sit your ass down in the chair, and get ready for our history class. Okay, today's lesson is what was happening in the world in the 1400s. All right, so this period in time was called the Age of Discovery, aka the Spice Rush.
Now, Europe was obsessed with pepper, cinnamon, silk, gold, and a bunch of other spices and shit. For centuries, all that good stuff came from Asia, aka the Indies, along what was known as Silk Road.
Now, something else that is extremely important during this time is Constantinople. Okay. I'm pretty sure I said that wrong, but we're just going to go with it.
No, you said it right.
Said it right? Constantinople.
Yeah.
This place was a major city and the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire for over 1,000 years. It had been there for a while.
But why is this place important? Well, this city was located between Europe and Asia. It was a thriving area for trade, religion, and culture. Also, the city was on the Silk Road and served as the primary Western place for main trade routes connecting East Asia with Europe.
All right. So, like we said, in the 1400s, Europe was obsessed with pepper, cinnamon, silk, gold, and all those other spices and shit. And all of that stuff, it came from Asia along what was known as the Silk Road.
However, in 1453, when Columbus was only a little toddler, the city of Constantinople, it ends up getting taken over by the Ottoman Turks. Suddenly, the main route to Asia is closed. And all these European trade cities were like, we need another way to get our spice fix.
Yeah.
Not the spice you smoke, but the spice you use for food.
Yeah. And what was the answer to their problem? The sea. No more walking through some dry ass land. Instead, they started taking boats and sailing down Africa's coast, and they would come back up to the European areas with ivory, gold, and unfortunately, some enslaved people.
It was at this point that most folks figured that the easiest way east to India for trading and to get their spice fix, it was to sail south and wrap around Africa. However, Columbus was about to cook up an even bolder idea, one that sounded completely bananas at the time.
All right, so that's the end of our history class. Now, let's jump back to Columbus. All right, so Columbus is sitting there listening to everyone talking about, hey, how the fuck we going to get our spice fix, right? The Turks done shut down the Silk Road. We can't pass over that area. So instead, we're going to start sailing down up and around Africa to get all the way up to the Asia area to get our spice fix and then sail all the way back around. Columbus was like, look, all of you guys are doing it wrong. You're plotting these routes all the way around Africa. That's going to take too long. I've got it. We will sail west to get to east. That's what he figured. You sail west, go all the way around the world, and end up on the back end of it.
In other words, why not just shoot straight across the Atlantic and pop out in Asia on the other side of it? But real quick, let's clear up a myth.
Yeah. So at this time, Columbus didn't have to stand up in front of a crowd and yell, "The earth is round." People already knew that. Scholars had been saying it since ancient Greeks. They didn't think the earth was flat. Well, some did, but not all of them.
The real problem here was Columbus's math. He wasn't Asian, so he wasn't good at it. But he was convinced that Asia was way closer than it actually was.
In his calculations, Columbus shrank the Earth's size by about a quarter and stretched Asia way too far to the east. According to his charts, Japan was maybe 2,500 nautical miles from Europe, but in reality, it was more like 10,000 plus nautical miles.
Jeez.
He was way off.
Now, when Columbus talked to his advisors about his plan, they told him, dude, you're going to sail off into nowhere and just die.
So Columbus has this wild plan to sail west. And now he's got to find someone crazy enough or rich enough to fund it.
So for years, he's basically this traveling salesman of impossible voyages. The first stop would be Portugal. King John II's experts take one look at his numbers and go, yeah, buddy, your math is a disaster. Rejected.
And then in 1485, Columbus tries Spain. Now, Spain at this point in time isn't the mega empire it'll become. It's still busy booting out the last Muslim stronghold out of Granada. However, Spanish scholars still hear out Columbus's proposal, but they weren't impressed.
Meanwhile, though, Columbus sends his brother Bartholomew off to England and France with the pitch. Spoiler alert, they said no. So by 1491, Columbus was running out of options. However, that would all change.
One evening, as Columbus was hanging out in the halls of a palace in Spain, he's just chilling there, being like, man, my life sucks. Queen Isabella, along with the king, just happened to walk past Columbus. They look at him, they're like, what's up? Columbus bows to them, and as they pass him, he begins to think to himself,
this is my one shot. This is my one opportunity to seize everything I've ever wanted. Should I capture it or just let it slip?
Columbus decides to shoot his shot. He begins to walk up to the king and queen. His palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. Columbus is nervous, but on the surface, he looks calm and ready. He looks at the king and queen and says,
Your Majesty, give me just a few ships and I'll find Japan and China. I'll bring back riches that are so grand.
Now, Isabella and the king, they listen to Columbus's proposal while they smile politely. Now, something that we didn't mention earlier is that Queen Isabella actually has already turned Columbus down twice before. Her advisors kept saying, nope, the math is bad. The plan is risky. Don't fund it.
But Columbus, he was persistent. He was like the medieval version of spam emails you get in your inbox. So needless to say, they rejected Columbus's proposal again.
And he was pretty pissed off about it and pretty depressed. So he decided to pack his shit up and leave Spain. Now, before he left, as he was packing up, he began bitching to anyone that could hear him. He's like, man, the motherfucking queen and king, they won't fund my shit. I swear to God, I could get across the Atlantic, dog. I swear to God. That's what he was saying to people.
Well, it was at this point that he learned something very important. Columbus was told that the queen and king didn't want gold or glory. They wanted to spread Christianity far and wide.
So his pitch wasn't the right pitch. He was saying, hey, I can get you gold and glory, but in reality, they wanted to spread Christianity. And something that we didn't mention before is that Columbus, he was a hardcore Catholic. And once he learned about this dream that the queen and king had, he decided to write them a letter instead of visiting them again. And in this letter, he wrote that he wanted to bring back enough gold and riches to help fund the recapture of Jerusalem from Muslim control, basically to prepare the world for Christ's grand return.
He also stated that he truly believed that his voyage wasn't just a business deal, but a divine mission of spreading Christianity. Columbus ended up sending the letter and waited. He didn't hear anything back for a while and said, you know what, fuck it, I'm leaving. Screw it.
Yep, so he started packing all of his shit up again, and it was around this time that a royal messenger galloped up and said, hold up, wait a minute, you Christopher Columbus, right? And Christopher's like, yeah, that's me. And he's like, well, the queen wants to see you. Get your ass to the court. So Queen Isabella and the king, They changed their mind and decided to roll the dice.
They offer Columbus a pretty sweet deal. He will be named Admiral of the Ocean Sea, made governor of any lands he discovers, and get this, he will pocket 10% of all the profits.
Now, for Spain, this was a high stakes gamble. But for Columbus, it was the ultimate jackpot and the beginning of a voyage that would change the world.
All right, now the adventure is finally happening. With Spain's royal stamp of approval, Columbus puts together what he calls the Enterprise of the Indies. Sounds huge, right? Well, in reality, it's only 3 ships, and none of them were considered large.
That's what she said.
Damn.
Now, the main ship was the Santa Maria. It was about 60 feet long and very slow, but it was sturdy. Now, Columbus nicknamed this ship La Gallega, and the other 2 ships were a little smaller. There's the Pinta, which means the painted one, and then there is the Nina, which means the girl.
All right, so on August 3rd, 1492, Columbus, his 3 ships and small crew, they set sail, leaving Spain and headed west. All of them were convinced that they were about to find a shortcut to Asia.
Also, something else worth mentioning is that the main ship, the Santa Maria, Columbus was overseeing that one, and the other 2 ships, the Nina and Pinta, that was captained by 2 brothers. Okay? So I want you to picture this. About 90 guys crammed onto 3 not so big ships heading straight into the great we have no idea what's out there. Okay? And for weeks, almost, well, a little over 2 months, all they saw was the open ocean. Nothing but blue water and bluer skies.
Columbus kept them on course using the stars, measuring the sun and the North Star like some kind of 15th century GPS. He also kept 2 logbooks, one with the real mileage and a second don't panic version with shorter distances so the crew wouldn't freak out about how far they've actually gone. Pretty sneaky, right?
Yeah, 2 logbooks, a real one and then a fake one. All right, so we're going to fast forward to October 10th, 1492. It had been a little over 60 days since they had left Spain and sailed west. After being at the sea this long, their provisions were running low, and they had sailed more than 3,000 miles without spotting so much as a single noodle from Japan or China.
Also, the patience between the sailors began to run thin. They were all sunburned, hungry, and pissed off. Some of them began whispering to each other, "If we don't see land soon, we're turning this boat around. Fuck Admiral."
Now, at the same time, Martin Pinzon, the captain of the Pinta, he was shooting nervous looks over at his brother, Vicente, over on the Nina. He was looking at him thinking, man, look, these freaking soldiers, these sailors on my boat, they're talking about rebelling. But he couldn't yell to his brother over there on his other boat because then the sailors would be like, man, fuck you. So he was shooting those nervous looks over at Vicente being like, are we sure we want to continue with this? Because I don't want to die.
But of course, Columbus, he did feel the tension, so he decides to sweeten the deal. He tells the sailors, whoever spots land first gets a giant pile of gold. This motivates the sailors to continue on and not rebel.
Fast forward 2 days later. It's the night of October 11th. And around 10 p.m., Columbus goes to the stern of the boat and begins staring out into the horizon. Suddenly, he claims to see something, a flicker way off in the distance.
He yells for his crew to come over. Some of the sailors see it, others don't. Columbus later writes in his journal,
It looked like a tiny candle floating up in the dark. Could be a fire on land or just wishful thinking.
rumor of this possible land sighting, it spread amongst the sailors, and it was enough to keep them going.
And as we were researching this, I initially thought, as I was going through his journal, I wonder if he's just doing this as a way to keep the sailors motivated and keep them from rebelling. As being like, oh, no, 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 because it did separate them. Some claimed to have seen the flicker of the light and others didn't. So it couldn't bring them together to rebel because some would be like, no, 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 there's land out there. And others would be like, you know.
I figured it would be his way of not having to pay gold. He's like, oh, I spotted it first.
Yeah, it is
I don't have to
smart.
pay y'all shit.
Yeah. Well, you didn't have to wait long because only a few hours later at 2 a.m. on October 12th, a voice erupts from the Pinta. Someone yells, land, land. And that individual is Rodrigo de Triana. and he spotted an island on the horizon.
And at this point, the crews on all three boats lose it, cheering, praying, and even crying with relief. And after 2 months of staring at nothing but the ocean, they finally found solid ground.
So the sun comes up that next morning, and there it is, a tropical island, all green trees and white sand shining in the morning light. Columbus is thrilled, and he names it San Salvador, aka Holy Savior. He claims the land for God in Spain like he's just unlocked a new level in an adventure game.
But here's the thing, there were people already living there. They were called the Lucayans. And this land that Columbus named San Salvador, well, it already had a name. It was called Guanahani.
And we do have a couple of maps to show you where Columbus had sailed. The first one is kind of a pulled out view. You can see the line from Spain going all the way to almost Cuba. And then we zoom in a little more. You can see the San Salvador Island. And we zoom in again. And you can see how close the San Salvador Island is to the Bahamas and all the rest of these islands.
Where the arrow was pointing, it looks like he found one of those big islands, but the more you zoom in, he found the smallest island
Yeah.
there is.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right. So, like we said, Columbus, he's sitting there and he's like, hell yeah, we found this island. And the natives, they heard the commotion and they all started to walk up onto the beach and stand there and stare as these individuals, just a parade of these strangers, start getting in their dinghies because they had smaller boats, right? And they moored their larger boats off and then got in these small dinghies and they rowed up to the beach. And these natives are standing there just staring at them, probably wondering, who the fuck are all these people?
Where the hell did they come from?
Yeah.
So the dinghy reaches the beach. Columbus steps onto the beach in full ceremony mode. He grabs a Spanish flag from a nearby sailor, runs right up to the natives that are standing on the beach, and plants the flag right there in front of him, like, just staring at him.
Then Columbus announces very dramatically, I am taking this island for Spain. Well, the natives, they just continue standing there staring at Columbus, wondering, what the fuck did he just say? Because they couldn't understand him.
Now, something worth mentioning is that these natives, aka the Lucayans, they're gentle fishermen who are completely unfamiliar with iron, guns, and the weird gear that these newcomers are hauling with them.
So these were like pretty much aliens to them, these people. And something else worth mentioning is what Columbus wrote in his journal about these natives. And we have an exact quote from his journal that we're going to go over. Columbus said, and we quote,
I knew that these people, as in the natives, could be converted to our holy faith by love than by force. Upon meeting them, I gave them glass beads to put around their necks and many other things of little value, which gave them great pleasure. This act made them our friends, and it was a marvel to see.
Afterwards, they came to our ships where we were. They swam up and brought us parrots, cotton threads, darts, and many other things. We exchanged them for other things that we gave them, such as more glass beads and small bells.
These natives seemed to be very poor people. They are all naked, even the women. Everyone I had seen was young, not above 30 years of age. All of them were well made, with fine shapes and faces.
Weapons they have none, nor are acquainted with them. I showed them swords, which they grabbed by the blades and cut themselves through ignorance. They have no iron. Their javelins are without iron and are made with nothing more than sticks.
These natives appear to have no religion and would likely become Christians quickly. All of these people are alike. They are of good size, stature, and carry themselves well.
It appears to me that these people are clever and would be good servants. I could conquer the whole of them with only 50 men and govern them as I pleased. What a piece of shit.
Yeah, that's a piece of shit. Kind of creepy, too.
Yeah.
They are well made, with fine shapes and faces. Weirdo. So that is what Columbus said in his journal after meeting the natives. And the comment he made about them being servants and how he could conquer them, well, that would be a chilling hint of everything that was about to unfold.
Now, something else worth mentioning is that Columbus is certain that he is just off the coast of Asia, Japan, or maybe even the Indies. And for this reason, Columbus didn't stay in San Salvador. Instead, he spent the next few weeks sailing around and continued to land on nearby islands, meeting more of the local communities.
Columbus sails south and lands in Cuba, which he thinks is China. He continues sailing and lands in Hispaniola, which today that's Haiti and the Dominican Republic.
Now, every time Columbus lands somewhere new, he keeps asking the same questions to the natives. Where's the gold? However, none of them understand him. So they're like, huh?
So Columbus tries to communicate through hand signals, but that doesn't work. He even captures a handful of natives and trains them to act as guides. Eventually, Columbus is able to establish some communication between the natives and guides.
Now, when the natives are asked about gold, they keep pointing Columbus towards shiny stuff in the mountains to the southeast. After a while, Columbus and his crew start to get aggravated. Their appetite for treasure was barely hidden.
One of Columbus's own men, Miquel de Cunho, he wrote in his journal the following: "The admiral's, aka Columbus, his obsession for gold ran so deep that he punished the locals for trying to hide tiny bits of gold jewelry." Now, it was this journal entry that was an ugly hint of the tyranny that was about to follow.
So let's fast forward to December 25th, 1492. It's Christmas, and Columbus is just sailing right off the coast of Hispaniola. And at the time, a cabin boy was supposed to be keeping watch and kind of steering the boat as the rest of the crew relaxed. However, instead of steering the boat, his bitch ass decides to take a nap.
So the Santa Maria, Columbus's prize ship, the biggest one, runs smack dab into a reef right off the coast of Hispaniola. The Santa Maria ship is done for and had to be abandoned. So now only left with the Nina and Pinta remaining, Columbus makes a tough decision.
He gathers up 39 of his men and takes them to the shore of Hispaniola. Columbus helps the men set up a tiny makeshift fort that he calls La Navidad, which the reason he calls it that it's because the wreck happened on Christmas.
So the 39 men are all in this small ass fort they made. Columbus tells the men that he is taking the remaining two ships along with their crew, filling with some captured natives and other gold trinkets, and going back to Spain. He also tells the men,
Look, now while I'm gone, y'all's job is to hunt for gold. Also, wait until I get back from Spain and don't go anywhere. Okay, just hunt for some gold.
confused. One of his men looks at him and then asks,
How long is it going to be till you get back?
well, Columbus looks at his men, turns, and then takes off, hauling ass, running towards the beach, jumps in his small dinghy boat, and then he paddles his ass off towards the Nina, climbs aboard the ship, and begins sailing back home.
You know, his 39 men are like, wait, what? What the fuck?
Boss, where you going?
So, like we said, on board these boats were captured natives, a few gold trinkets, and a story so sensational that it's going to rock Europe. So Columbus and his two ships start sailing the open sea, heading back to where they came from.
Finally, in March of 1493, after 2 long months at sea, Columbus arrived back in Spain. Upon his arrival, he gets a full hero treatment. And as he is walking to the court, people are cheering and kissing his feet. You go, boy.
Yeah. And it's around this time that Columbus is showing off his bright parrots that were given to him. He's like, look at these birds and shit. Aren't they crazy looking? Also, he's like, look at this gold. And look at these gold trinkets. You like gold? And then he has the handful of captured natives with him. And he's like, look at these. Look at these natives that I caught. And a little knowledge nugget, Columbus's dumbass was calling these natives, he was calling them Indians. Look at these Indians that I have. Because he still thought he had hit the Indies and that these were Indians, but they weren't.
Now, like we said, everyone is psyched to see Columbus, though. All of Europe thinks that he just discovered a shortcut to Asia. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Of course, the king and queen are psyched as well. They give him all the titles that he was promised.
Side note, the king and queen were psyched because of, what they were imagining. They had just sent this guy out, and he came back with all these crazy claims and a little bit of proof to back it up. In their eyes, they were going to send Columbus back out there with more ships, and these ships would return to Spain filled with spices and gold, making everyone super rich. So kind of contradicting what Their original mission was to spread Christianity. However, it didn't matter because the story was about to get a lot more complicated.
Now, Columbus wasted no time capitalizing on his discovery. Just a few months after getting back, in September of 1493, he set out again, but this time it wasn't a small little trio of ships. Oh no. He rode out with 17 ships and about 1,200 men. This wasn't just an adventure anymore, it was an invasion force and colonizing mission.
Also, it had been almost a year since he'd left his men, 39 men there at Hispaniola.
Oh God.
Yeah. So, along with the soldiers that Columbus had brought on board his ships, he also brought along farmers, a few women, livestock, and even priests to convert the locals. So, basically, Europe in a box. And Columbus's plan, it was pretty simple: snag gold, claim land, and in Columbus's eyes, or in his mind, maybe bump into the grand Asian cities that he still thought were just hiding just over the horizon.
So Columbus sails back to the islands, expecting to find his little outpost thriving, but instead walks back into a nightmare. La Navidad, the fort he left on Hispaniola, is a smoldering wreck.
All 39 of his men are dead, wiped out. And it's most likely because they began harassing the local natives, demanding gold and women. But the natives had enough, fought back, and killed all of Columbus's men.
However, this didn't really bother Columbus. On that same island, he decides to set up a brand new settlement on its north coast and names it Isabella, after the queen.
This would be Europe's first permanent foothold in the Americas, and honestly, it was a train wreck from day one. The colonists dealt with hunger, disease, and discontent.
Now, at the same time, Columbus considered himself the ruler, not only over his soldiers and the colonists that came with him, but also over the natives in Hispaniola. Also, he promised the king and queen in Spain all this gold and spice, so he felt a large amount of pressure. And when the natives couldn't supply him with that large amount of gold, that is when things turned pretty bad.
Under Columbus's rule, Hispaniola turned into a brutal colony. Even the people that actually liked Columbus stated that he was an asshole. He demanded gold from the natives and ordered every native adult on the island to pay him tribute. They had to provide him with a hawk's bell full of gold dust every 3 months.
Now, what if some of the natives lived somewhere on the island that didn't have any gold? Well, they were told to pay up pounds of cotton instead.
So every 3 months, these natives would line up and give Columbus either a hawk's bell full of gold dust or pounds of cotton. And to keep track of these payments, Columbus would give out these little tokens for the natives to hang around their neck. It was like some twisted VIP pass proving that they'd made their payment that month or that those past 3 months.
Now, what if you missed the deadline, though? Or you got caught without a token around your neck? Well, the punishment was horrific. One historical account states that Columbus's men chopped off people's hands and left them to bleed to death as a warning.
Now, a lot of these natives couldn't meet these demands, and many of them either fled into the mountains, others starved, and some even committed mass suicide with poisonous roots rather than face these impossible demands. This was the dark side of Columbus's new world. It was a system built on impossible quotas and sheer terror.
And things just kept getting worse. Under Columbus's watch, the first transatlantic slave shipment kicked off.
By 1495, Columbus was desperate to impress his sponsors, aka the king and queen back in Spain. So what he did is he rounded up more than 1,000 native people on Hispaniola. 500 of them were put on ships and sent across the Atlantic, and about 200 of them died on the voyage and were tossed into the sea.
In doing this, Columbus had lit the fuse on what would become the Atlantic slave trade, one of the biggest crimes in human history.
So the ship made it back to Spain with these enslaved natives. And to be fair, Queen Isabella wasn't thrilled about the idea of enslaving these natives. So she officially declared that these people of the Indies were not to be enslaved. Side note, everyone still thought that Columbus had made it to the Indies and that these natives were Indians. They were like, we're not Indians. What are y'all talking about?
All right, so we're going to go back to talking about what was happening on Hispaniola. Now, Columbus wasn't the only one committing crimes. His right hand men even participated in these cruelties.
In many journals of the settlers, there are written entries that describe how Columbus's men would drag native women away to rape them. If they resisted, they would cut their ears and noses off. And it just keeps getting worse. So, listener discretion advised.
Also, Columbus captured a native woman and gifted this woman to his friend Miquel de Cunha. And Miquel then wrote in his journal about how he beat this native woman into submission, raped her, and even said, and we quote, she seemed to have been brought up in a school for whores.
This stomach turning confession from one of Columbus's own companions was a peek behind this shiny discovery story. It just shows how nightmarish things really were.
A random knowledge nugget, though. When Columbus had arrived in Hispaniola, there were hundreds of thousands of natives living there. Within a few decades, due to harsh labor, violence, and European diseases, all of the natives on Hispaniola would become extinct.
Yeah, wiped out an entire civilization.
That is, that's almost like a genocide on the island.
It is. That was a genocide. Yeah.
Jesus.
All right. So continuing forward, word of Columbus's management style began drifting back to Spain, and it wasn't good. Even the Spanish colonists who had signed up to chase gold, they were pretty much fed up.
Columbus, his brother Bartholomew, and their crew were running Hispaniola like tyrants, hoarding whatever scraps of profit there were and handing out brutal punishment to everyone. Things got so tense that Columbus actually had to crush a revolt from his own men, who were starving and furious over all the broken promises.
Now, after that, you would think Columbus would start caring about his men, people and the natives more. However, he did not. Instead, in 1498, Columbus set sail on his third voyage. And this time, he finally makes it to the mainland of South America.
Columbus then sails further south and stumbled across the mouth of a massive river in what is now Venezuela. Now, the flow of this fresh water is so huge that Columbus starts to wonder if he's found the biblical Garden of Eden. He decides to head back to Hispaniola and tell everyone what he had found.
Columbus had been gone from 1498 to 1499, and during this time, Hispaniola, of course, was a mess. Columbus's brother was barely holding down revolts, Spanish settlers were ignoring orders, and the native population was devastated and desperate. This news continued to get back to the Queen and King in Spain, and it got so bad that the crown finally said enough and sent a royal investigator named Francisco de Bobadilla to see what on earth was going on.
So Columbus arrived back in Hispaniola and discovered the mess that was there. Also, he gets the news that Spain is sending a royal investigator to see what's going on. A few months later, in August of 1500, the royal investigator arrives and confronts the 50-year-old Columbus.
Francisco unrolls a scroll bearing the monarch's seal. This scroll is an order to relieve Columbus of his command. Columbus was then arrested and sent back to Spain in chains.
So just picture it. The guy who once strutted around as Admiral of the Ocean Sea, now clanking around a ship like an extra from Pirates of the Caribbean, in chains and everything.
Now, when Columbus arrives back in Spain as a prisoner, he still has some powerful people that are on his side. And even public opinion about him is split. Some people say,
Hey, Columbus discovered new lands and some shiny gold for Spain. Not as much as promised, but still.
On the other hand, you had witness after witness saying,
This guy's a tyrant! Fuck him!
pretty much. So during this period, the royal court had individuals tell their stories of Columbus, and they are floored by what they hear. Stories of torture, greed, and pretty much general chaos.
However, it doesn't matter. The king and queen ordered that the shackles be removed and officially pardoned him. But there's a catch. They stripped Columbus of his title as governor of the Indies. He could never rule the lands he once claimed.
And you would think after his giant fuck up and mismanagement and pretty much being a tyrant and a piece of shit, that Columbus would stop exploring lands and just be like, look, okay, I'm done with all that. However, that's not the case. He begins to plead to the royal court for one last voyage.
And surprisingly, it was granted to him. This was due to the king and queen still hoping that Columbus might dig up that mythical shortcut to Asia, or at least find some of that treasure that he talked about.
So in 1502, Columbus launched his fourth voyage with very clear instructions from the royal court. Do not stop in Hispaniola. The new governor there wants nothing to do with you, so do not stop there. He fucking hates you. So Columbus sailed to the parts of the Caribbean that no European had charted yet, hugging the coasts of what we now call Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama.
Columbus ran into Mayan trading canoes and thick, steamy jungles. Now, if he'd just sailed a little further north, he might have bumped straight into the massive Aztec or Maya civilizations. But nope, those stayed hidden.
Columbus kept sailing, looking for a sea passage through to the Indian Ocean, which, spoiler alert, it doesn't exist down there. Instead, his fleet got chewed up by shipworms and battered by brutal weather.
By June of 1503, Columbus's ships were a mess, though. They were all eaten up by the worms and leaking like crazy. He finally had to beach two of the ships on the coast of Jamaica, and just like that, he and his crew were stuck.
No sails, no boats, no way out. Just a bunch of grumpy Spaniards baking in the Caribbean sun. Now, Columbus was desperate, so he sent messages to Hispaniola begging the governor for help. But the guy was still furious with him and basically said, yeah, good luck with that.
That's what happens when you burn your bridges.
Yep.
So it was at this point that the local Jamaican natives decided to help. They were incredibly generous, bringing food to Columbus and his men, keeping these shipwrecked strangers alive.
But surprise, surprise, Columbus's men couldn't help themselves. They started taking advantage of the natives. Eventually, the natives had enough and tensions started to bubble.
So around that time, Columbus became desperate and began looking for solutions. As he was sitting under a makeshift tent on Jamaica's beach, he got out his almanac and began flipping through it. That is when he spots something. February 29, 1504, a date with potential.
Columbus then gets up and quickly gathers all the native leaders together for a meeting. During this meeting, Columbus stands up and looks at all of them, and then he says the following.
The Christian God is furious you stopped helping us. Tonight, he'll show his anger. The moon will rise red with wrath.
The leaders just look at one another, shrug, stand up, and walk away. However, it doesn't really bother them until sunset, when the sky darkens and the moon starts turning a deep, bloody red color.
Yep, Columbus had one last card up his sleeve. He read in his astronomical tables that a lunar eclipse was coming, and he milked it for what it was all worth.
As the terrified natives begged him to make the moon normal again, Columbus did some very theatrical praying. He said, hold on. Pray that this goes away. Waited until the eclipse passed, and voila, the moonlight returned.
Was it sneaky? Absolutely. But that clever but also shitty move, it probably saved his stranded crew from starvation or an ugly fight.
So we fast forward to a few months later. Salvation finally shows up, a rescue ship from Hispaniola. Then in 1504, Columbus headed back to Spain, no longer the admiral of the ocean sea, but a sick, aging man. His last years were mostly spent in bed, wrestling with arthritis and a grab bag of other illnesses.
Also, Columbus clung to the idea that the islands he found were near Japan or China, and that he'd done exactly what he set out to do. Due to this belief, Columbus continuously sent letters to King Ferdinand, demanding the titles and his 10% cut of the New World riches he believed were still owed to him. But he was ignored. Rightfully so.
On May 20th, 1506, at around 54 to 55 years old, Columbus died in Spain, frustrated, feeling betrayed, but absolutely convinced that history hadn't yet given him the credit he deserved.
Hundreds of years later, though, Christopher Columbus would become a figure of triumph. In classrooms, he was painted as a hero who discovered lands, while his crimes were ignored.
On one hand, Columbus undeniably changed the world, opening contacts between hemispheres that reshaped the world itself. But on the other hand, his arrival marked the beginning of a genocide and oppression for many native people.
He was both a visionary and a villain, often at the same time, an expert sailor and a shitty governor, a devout Christian who unleashed unholy horrors, a man convinced he was chosen by God, yet cursed by the consequences of his own deeds.
And that is the history of Christopher Columbus. However, our episode does not stop here because now we are going to get into the strange facts and findings that we uncovered while doing this research. By the way, they are very, very weird. We talk about mermaids. We talk more about this sex slave ring he built. He actually wrote a book about prophecies, kind of like Nostradamus. His body was sent around the world. Uh, there's a lot of weird things we talk about in Strange Facts and Findings.
Interesting.
Yeah. So do you want to start it off for us?
Of course. So, our first strange fact and finding is called mermaids. So, during his first voyage, Columbus wrote in his journal something that would become one of history's strangest sightings.
So it all started in January of 1493. Columbus had just finished helping his 39 men build the La Navidad fort, and he ran back to his dinghy, got in his boat, jumped in his other ship, and started sailing back. And it was at that point when he started sailing back to Spain, he was right off the coast of Hispaniola that he spotted something odd in the water.
Columbus looked into the sea and saw three figures in the water that he called mermaids. In his journal, Columbus stated these mermaids were not half as beautiful as they are painted, and their faces were shaped like a man's. Now, a lot of historians say that what Columbus had seen were not mermaids, but instead were manatees bobbing in the water.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
If you've never seen a manatee before and you've seen like three of them bobbing up down, you'd be like, damn, that's a fat ass mermaid with an ugly ass face.
Don't they have like a weird nose too? Or?
No, that's a different thing. Manatees have like a normal looking snout. Then there's the other ones that have the big ass like wiener looking nose.
Oh, that's the elephant seal.
Yeah, and then you have the leopard
seals?
Those things are fucking dangerous. I heard a story last night about a girl, I think around Antarctica or something. She was swimming out to do some study or whatever, and a leopard seal grabbed her and pulled her down and killed her. And then the seal surfaced like 6 minutes later, I want to say almost a mile away, and the scientists drove their boat over there to it, and the leopard seal had her head in its mouth, and they like poked him, and he like let her go, and they brought her body on board. But those things are huge and incredibly dangerous.
Mm.
They are the number 2 predator in the in Antarctica. You want to know what the number 1 is?
Orcas.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Before we get into this next strange fact and finding, I just kind of want to give you a heads up. This is incredibly disturbing, and it involves a sex ring of children. So fast forward about 5 or 10 minutes if you don't want to hear it, but it's part of history. All right. So our next strange fact and finding is about Columbus's brutal rule. So under his governance, sexual violence was rampant. Settlers took native girls as young as 9 years old and sold them into sexual slavery. And they built this giant sexual slavery ring where they sold these kids into.
So, in one of his letters, Columbus casually notes that, and we quote, those from 9 to 10 years old are now in demand by Spanish sex traffickers in the colonies.
End quote.
End quote. This is the darkest underside of Columbus's legacy that a lot of historians try to ignore and not talk about.
However, Columbus oversaw a regime where rape and sex slavery were perpetrated openly. And Columbus knew about it. He even profited from it. And how do we know this? Well, he wrote a letter to his friend and said, and we quote, a good price could be fetched for girls of all ages. Talking about taking the girls, selling them into this slavery sex ring that he had built, and how much money he was making off of it, regardless of the age.
So pretty much he was the 1400s and 1500s Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah.
And Epstein Island was pretty much Hispaniola.
Yeah, pretty much.
Jeez.
It just keeps getting worse with this next strange fact and finding.
All right, so our next strange fact and finding is called Prophecies. Now, you all remember when Columbus was laying in his bed, writing those letters to the king, claiming that he was owed stuff. Well, around that same time, between 1501 and 1505, He also became obsessed with apocalyptic religious ideas.
Between 1501 to 1505, Columbus collected over 200 biblical passages and comments by church leaders, along with his own writings, combined all of those, and created what he called the Book of Prophecies. Now, we don't have time to go over this entire book. However, we have selected a few things from it to talk about.
So, in this book, Columbus believed the world was ending soon. He stated that history was racing towards the apocalypse. From his Bible calculations, he decided the world would last 7,000 years and that only about 150 years remained. His voyages, he thought, were part of God's countdown to the second coming.
Columbus also stated that he was chosen to spread Christianity. He saw himself as a tool to fulfill prophecies about the gospel reaching all nations before Judgment Day. He quoted Isaiah and Revelations, saying that the discovery of new lands was foretold and that his duty was to open them to the Christian faith.
Columbus also wrote that the riches from the Indies could finance a new crusade to retake Jerusalem, preparing the world for Christ's return. He linked his discoveries directly to the rebuilding of the temple and the conversion of all peoples.
Also, he combed the Bible for verses about islands, distant seas, or ends of the earth, claiming that these verses predicted a Western Ocean route to new lands, the path he believed God had revealed to him.
And another thing he often talked about in this book was his personal destiny. Columbus often implied that God had singled him out, an uneducated mariner chosen over scholars and princes to open the gates of the ocean sea.
Yeah, so he became like a religious fanatic toward the end of his time. Started pretty much believing he was like chosen by God and all this stuff. Very weird. And he would use God as an excuse for his crimes. And somebody was like, "Hey, you're a piece of shit. You committed all these crimes." And he was like, "It was because God, made it so. I had to go fulfill these prophecies and God chose me. And these crimes that were committed is because God chose me. I didn't commit them personally," is what he would say. And then at the same time, he was writing the king, being like, "You owe me fucking 10% of all my royalties and land. I found all this shit for you. You're a piece of shit." And the king and queen just ignored him, just kept continuing to ignore him.
He went through the Bible, I guess, from what it says, and he was nitpicking at what he thought worked for him. That's the stuff that ruins religions.
So our next strange fact and finding is called World Tour. Now, when Columbus died in Spain in 1506, just a little over 30 years later in 1537, his body was moved across the Atlantic to Santo Domingo in the Caribbean. And real quick, just a little knowledge nugget. The reason his body was moved there is because Columbus had a son named Diego. And in Diego's will, whenever he passed away, he wanted his father's remains to be moved to this area.
Mm.
So Diego passed away, and then by his will, they executed this. They took Columbus's remains in 1537 and moved them across the Atlantic.
Now, Columbus's body would remain there until 1795, when Spain gave up control of that island to France. Now, Spain didn't want to leave Columbus's body there under foreign rule, so Spain dug up what they thought were his remains and moved them to Havana, Cuba.
Then in 1898, after Spain lost Cuba in the Spanish-American War, they moved Columbus's remains back to Spain. But here's the kicker. In 1877, workers in Santo Domingo had found a lead box with bones that were labeled Christopher Columbus. So it appears part of Columbus may have been left behind.
The Dominican Republic insists Columbus is still in Santo Domingo, while Spain claims they have him. Modern DNA tests in 2006 confirmed the bones in Spain match Columbus's brother, but the Dominicans won't allow their urn to be tested.
So he could half and half. He could be in both, or, he could just be in Spain. But what they know for sure is that some of the bones they have in Spain are for sure his.
That's very weird that they would split the body.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's talk about our next strange fact, which is called never discovered. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that Columbus did not actually set foot on what is now the continental United States. However, for centuries, American history books credited him with discovering America.
In truth, he only explored parts of the Caribbean and the coast of Central and South America, never touching North America. And of course, the indigenous peoples had discovered and inhabited the Americas way before Columbus. Even the Nordic Viking explorer Leif Erikson beat Columbus to the Americas by about 500 years, landing in Newfoundland around 1000 AD.
And yeah, we talk about this Viking explorer a little later on in our theory section.
Leif Erikson.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about our next strange fact and finding, which is called many identities. So it might surprise you that Christopher Columbus was not the name that he called himself. He went by multiple different names, and it all depended on where he was located at the time. And a lot of these pronunciations are going to be off, so just bear with us.
In Genoese, he was Cristoforo Colombo. In Italian, he was Cristoforo Colombo. In Latin, Christophorus Columbus. In Spanish, he was Cristobal Colon. And then Columbus even used different versions of his name, like Cristobal and Expula de Colun in his letters.
Yeah.
Which, another one of his identities, which I don't know if he really went by it, but he did sign off letters and stuff as Expo Forens, which means Christ bearer.
Yeah.
Which was very odd too. But I mean, he did say that he was chosen by God, singled out. So
It's weird.
very weird man indeed.
All right. So let's talk about our last strange fact and finding, which is called original journal. Now, Columbus's original journal of his first voyage, along with a bunch of his other journals, pretty much all of them, has never been found. And most scholars think it's been lost since the 16th century. To explain this a little better, Columbus, every time he would go out on a voyage, he would keep like a journal of everything. And then when he would go back to Spain, he would hand his journal over to the king and queen. They would read the journal, and then they'd be like, wow, that's great. And then put it in the royal archives. And anyone who got permission could go into the archives, retrieve it, read it, and then put it back. Okay. Now, all of his journals, gone, lost. But we do have a chain of custody that tracks to when it was lost. And Dan, can you go over that chain of custody?
Yep. So here's the chain of custody, as far as we can tell. Columbus kept a log during his 1492 to 93 voyage. After he returned, he gave it, or an official copy, to the Spanish crown so Ferdinand and Isabella could read about the discovery. At some point, the royal archives kept a manuscript or copy, but that document later disappeared. No one knows if it was destroyed by accident, lost in a move, eaten by insects, or quietly discarded when space was tight.
So if we don't have any of his journal entries, what do we go by? Well, what survives is Bartholomew de las Casas' abstract of that journal, written decades later, around 1530 to 1550. So Las Casas said he was working from a manuscript of Columbus's log that he found in the Royal Library, and he copied big sections word for word while summarizing others.
So everything we quote today about Columbus's first voyage, including the Mermaids, all come from Las Casas' derivative texts. The actual log Columbus wrote with his own hand or dictated hasn't been seen for about 500 years.
Historians have floated a handful of ideas about what became of the original log of Columbus's first journey and many others, but none of these pretty much ideas can be proved. Some believe that it was lost in the royal archives. After Columbus submitted his journal or an official copy to Ferdinand and Isabella, it was stored in the royal archives at Barcelona.
Paper records weren't always treasured. Inventories were lost when the offices moved, librarians misfiled things, or documents decayed. Some scholars think the log simply vanished through neglect, a very common fate for 15th century paperwork.
However, a few writers have speculated that royal officials, or even Columbus's heirs, during lawsuits over his titles, might have removed or destroyed some of the journals if it contained awkward or damning details. For example, about the mistreatment of indigenous people or disputes over rights. Now, there's no hard evidence of this, but the idea lingers because parts of the story were, politically sensitive.
Now, what we do know is that occasionally some individuals discover long lost early modern documents in overlooked bundles. It's a long shot, but some historians hold out hope that a version of Columbus's journal might still be tucked away, mislabeled, in a Spanish or Italian archive. So, unless a forgotten bundle of royal papers turn up, the original is probably gone forever, one of history's most famous missing manuscripts. So, pretty much that leads to whether all the crazy stuff that he did he actually do it? If you write it down in that, or
Well, what we're going by is what Las Casas said. And Las Casas was a individual who was big into the rights of indigenous people, and he began hearing about what was happening to the indigenous people by Spain. So he went to Spain and began like protesting, saying, "Hey, you need to leave these people alone and quit murdering them and quit committing genocide." And he
stop
just
bringing them over here as slaves?
yeah, so he decided to write a book and document it. And he is the one who pulled Columbus's journals and copied everything over. And then Columbus's journals disappeared after that. And there is a theory that a lot of the stuff that Columbus did, Las Casas kind of like
Embellished.
embellished to make him look like a worser person than he was. But that's not the case because a lot of the royal courts kept logs and letters written by Columbus and other individuals claiming that, hey, he really did all this fucked up stuff.
Ah,
Yeah,
so they had
eyewitness
receipts.
accounts. Yeah, they had receipts, eyewitness accounts, and other things. So,
Okay.
yeah. But that kind of leads us into our theories section. And we're going to start going over some theories about Columbus. All right. So, the first theory we have is called Columbus didn't exist. So, according to this theory, the guy we call Christopher Columbus was basically a made up character. Someone else led the voyages, and later writers decided to stick a new name on him. People point to the fact that there are gaps in the records about his early years, and we don't have any of his original logbooks, only later summaries like the one that Las Casas wrote. And that missing paperwork makes some folks wonder if there ever was a single real man named Christopher Columbus. And a lot of people wonder, why is this theory appealing? Well, because it turns one of the history's most famous explorers into kind of a legend, a hero invented after the fact. Now, the counter argument to this theory is that there are piles of contracts, royal orders, and letters signed by or mentioning Columbus between the 1480s and all the way up until his death in 1506. If he was fictional, somebody went to absurd lengths to forge decades worth of paperwork, and that's very unlikely.
And they got the bones.
Yep.
Part of
So
his bones.
he actually really did exist, but some people think he didn't. So that's our first theory.
All right, so the next theory that we have is called he was really someone else. According to this theory, Columbus isn't a wool weaver's kid from Italy. He's actually a nobleman, spy, maybe even a secret Knight Templar hiding behind an alias. Now, why do people believe this theory? Well, a lot of historians have pointed out that his handwriting isn't standard Genoese, and that his signature used strange letters, almost like a code. Plus, Columbus himself didn't really talk about parts of his youth. However, mainstream historians say there's no good proof he was anyone other than Cristoforo Colombo of Genoa, a guy who worked hard, married into a Portuguese family, and climbed the social ladder the old fashioned way.
And became a brutal dictator.
Tyrant.
Yeah. All right. I don't think he was really someone else, but I'll save my thoughts until the end.
I mean, he did, with all those different aliases, he probably thought he was a spy, or he tried to make himself like a nobleman. But yeah.
All right. So let's talk about this next theory, which is called Columbus's crimes were made up. This theory states that all those horror stories about chopping off hands, enslaving people, and the brutal tribute systems and sex slavery rings, it was all propaganda stirred up by rivals. Or maybe it was made up by Las Casas. Now, why would Las Casas make this up? Well, he was a passionate advocate for the rights of indigenous people, a position he developed over time after initially participating in the brutal Spanish colonial system. He spent over 50 years lobbying the Spanish crown to reform its policies and end the enslavement and abuse of these natives. Also, what we know is that all of Columbus's journal entries come from him. So maybe Las Casas was dramatic, embellishing in those crimes. However, there is a lot of other evidence that proves Columbus did commit those crimes. The royal investigation, letters from his own, people, and in population records, it showed how fast that area collapsed from his genocide. So while the stories can be exaggerated, the core evidence of abuse is pretty solid. That The crimes were not made up. They were real.
They were real.
Yeah.
Then again, La Casa could have probably just spiced it up a little bit,
Yeah.
but the crimes were real, though. All right, so the next theory we have is called He Knew About the Americas in Advance. This theory states that Columbus wasn't gambling blind across the Atlantic, that instead he secretly had maps or tips from Norse sailors, Muslim geographers, or shipwrecked fishermen who drifted west. People mention hints in old sources about mysterious charts and the fact that the Vikings reached Newfoundland centuries earlier. But the counterargument to this is that his calculations were actually way off. Columbus thought Asia was way closer than it is. If he had a good map, he wouldn't have needed to fudge the numbers so badly. If he had the Mercator map.
So maybe he did hear these theories, but his math was way off.
The only reason they had to start sailing like that is because Silk Road got shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like a major hub for trading and everything.
Yeah.
So
Originally, most of the people, almost everyone except Columbus, started sailing south, going up in kind of like around Africa to get to the Indies
I mean, he probably did hear rumors of new land or something
west.
west, but they never told him what land it was.
And
So he always thought it was the Indies.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So let's talk about this next theory we have, which is called Columbus was Jewish. This theory states that Columbus came from a family of Jews who converted to Christianity to survive Spain's Inquisition, and that he hid his roots while pitching voyages to the king and queen of Spain. People note that some of his scribbles and notes and letters used Hebrew like shorthand, and he liked quoting from the Old Testament. Plus, he set sail the very year that Spain expelled its Jews in 1492. It's appealing, this theory is, because it makes Columbus's push for royal backing feel personal. Instead of actually, wanting to go on voyages, instead he was leaving to escape persecution and chase a different opportunity. However, there's no smoking gun tying him to secret Jewish ancestry, just rumors. There are also large rumors that his family were converts and they were originally Jewish and they converted over to Christianity whenever they moved. But again, that's just a theory.
I mean, there's one thing that could back it up. His cruel treatment of the indigenous people. Going there and saying, I'm trying to spread the word of Christianity. But yet he pretty much destroys that whole fucking island, making then
Christianity look
it
bad.
made it look bad because let's say that other natives come from like another island there to trade with the other ones.
They're like,
They
don't
leave
fuck
it-
with these Christians.
Yeah, like don't mess with them. They're terrible. They're killing us. Look at Bob over there. He lost both hands.
Yeah.
I mean, that could work with that one, but I mean, like you said, there's no really true I guess facts showing that he had Jewish ancestry.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us about this next theory?
All right, so the next theory we have is called the Portuguese conspiracy. According to this theory, Columbus was really working for Portugal, not Spain. The idea is that he lured Spain into backing him so Portuguese planners could keep the best trade routes for themselves. Supporters note he lived in Lisbon for years, married a Portuguese woman, and after the treaty in 1494, Portugal wound up with prime territory. However, there's no paperwork proving he double-crossed Spain, and given how proud he was of being Admiral of the Ocean Sea, it's hard to picture him secretly plotting to help their rivals.
I think this one's just a theory.
Just a theory.
Yeah. It's fun to think about, but in reality, it's not real. Our last theory is called he meant to enslave all along. This theory states that Columbus didn't stumble into forced labor. He planned it from day one. People cite his later letters talking about financing crusades, plus the fact that tribute system and slave ships started almost immediately upon his arrival. It's a good theory because it explains the brutality as part of a business model, not just an accident. His main goal wasn't gold or a way to Asia. His main goal was actually an organized plan to build a slave empire. It's kind of convincing
Kind of convincing.
because he did do all that.
He did do all that. But I don't think it was meant all along. I think he just didn't want to go back empty handed or just small piles of gold because then he'd lose his backing by the king and queen.
He was under immense pressure. So he started this tribute system, and then it advanced to, hey, let's build this slave ring.
Like, what else can I take back other than, some parrots and this little bit of gold dust I got? Well, if I take back some of the people, they could be slaves for the king and queen and all that, and that could still get me backing because that's something valuable.
Yeah,
Fucked up, but that's probably how it went.
it is. And I guess now we kind of go into our own personal thoughts and theories. And I'm going to ask you, Dan, do you think that he committed these crimes? Do you believe he was a real person? What is your thoughts behind Christopher Columbus?
Real person committed these crimes. He did all these things, and I mean, there's no excuse for it. I don't know what else there is to say really, other than he did do all this stuff. There are legal documents from back then that did say that he did do these things, even if his original journals are gone. More than likely, in his original journals, would he have written that he committed all these terrible things? No, because the king and queen would have stopped it. It was not until after someone ratted him out that the king and queen sent a royal investigator. So he was only writing in his journal positive things like, oh, these people would, probably work for us, be our servants, because they'll follow the faith. They want to be one with God. King and queen are not God, but they're up there. You want to follow in line, work for the nobles. He probably wrote all good things in the journal, but when someone actually ratted him out, it was proof that he did do these things.
Yeah.
So, real person, real crimes,
Piece of shit.
piece of shit.
Yeah. Anyway, so there you go.
What do you think?
I think the same thing, the exact same thing. He committed these crimes, the royal court papers, even the letters that he wrote to other individuals, the eyewitness accounts of people that were there in Hispaniola. It all states the same thing, regardless if we have his journals or not. We know for a fact that he was a brutal, pretty much governor, and he sucked at what he did. And yeah,
And another reason why I think he's a real person is because our premium episode is Fountain of Youth. And we do talk a little bit about Juan Ponce de Leon and some of the shit that was said about him by the Columbus family or people that are under the influence of the Columbus family. There was a lot of shit talking back
Yeah.
then between,
they had beef.
yeah, there was some beef between the Columbuses and the Ponce de Leons.
Hmm.
So he was a real person.
So go listen to that premium episode, The Fountain of Youth. It's a good one.
Yeah.
But with that being said, do you have anything else you would like to add to today's episode?
Honestly, the more we do history stuff like this, the more I actually enjoy reading history, even though some of it's depressing. It shows that a lot of the stuff that we are taught is
Propaganda.
propaganda, like rewritten to make things look good.
Mhm.
Because even the whole story about the Fountain of Youth blew my mind after I researched it. And just like this, Christopher Columbus thinking he's this guy that founded America and was such an awesome guy. Find out he did all this crazy shit.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's history. I like learning. So
Yeah. I like whenever we do these deep historical dives. I mean, I like the conspiracy episodes as well, like the Isaac Cappy, Pizzagate, stuff like that. But I also like digging into historical stuff, like our slavery episode. We dug into that. We dug into multiple other things. But yeah,
the KKK,
yeah, we covered the KKK. That was a crazy episode. But
that was.
with that being said, that is the end of our episode today over Christopher Columbus. I hope you all have a good Columbus Day, or as it's known now, Indigenous People Day.
Nice.
But with that being said, I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for your support and your love. Without you, we could not do this.
That's right.
So, Dan, would you like to roll us out?
Sure will. It's okay to be out of this world with your thoughts.
Because you are not alone.